Unit 5, Lesson 2, The Causes of World War II. Unit 5, Lesson 2, Vocabulary. The aftermath of World War I set the stage for World War II, beginning with the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed June 28, 1919, at the Palace of Versailles in Paris, France. The treaty forced Germany to surrender colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, to cede territory to other nations like France and Poland, to reduce the size of its military, and to pay war reparations to the Allied countries. And lastly, the treaty required that Germany accept guilt for the war. So the Treaty of Versailles created a system of depression in and throughout Europe and overwhelming resentment in Germany. Many countries were economically ruined, and people feared and had a great fear of rising communism in the East from the Soviet Union. This created the perfect storm for dictators to rise to power. So throughout this period between World War I and the official beginning of World War II, dictators began to rise to power throughout Europe. They sought to become new world leaders. One of them, and the chief antagonist in World War II, Adolf Hitler of Germany and the Nazi Party. Hitler believed in a master race of Germans, and he used secret police and the military to control and manipulate the people of Germany. Another dictator that came to power between World War I and World War II was Benito Mussolini of Italy and the Fascist Party. He was a leader who promised a bright future for their people and often blamed others for all of their Italian problems. And Hideki Tojo of Japan, former general of the Imperial Japanese Army, he became the Prime Minister of Japan between World War I and World War II. He was another leader who promised a bright future for all Japanese people and blamed others, mainly Westerners, Europeans, and Americans, for all the problems facing Japan's citizens. After gaining national support and rising to power in their respective countries, in Italy for Mussolini, in Japan for Tojo, and in Germany for Hitler, these dictators, these leaders became aggressive for more power and more territory. So Germany, Italy, and Japan formed the Axis powers, and they wanted to be at the center of the world. America's position during this time, after helping the European powers win World War I, and before being attacked at Pearl Harbor in 1941, the American position was to be a good neighbor, where many Americans promoted isolationism. This isolationism continued even in the face of new developments by Axis powers. Congress in America passed the Neutrality Acts to keep the United States out of armed conflicts. Between 1935 and 1937, Congress passed three separate neutrality laws, placing an embargo on arms sales to belligerent nations. They forbid American ships from entering war zones and prohibited them from being armed. And also, they barred Americans themselves from traveling on belligerent ships from hostile nations. Throughout his presidency, President Roosevelt challenged the sense of isolationism amongst Americans, especially as Japan continued its aggressive actions in China. Since the US supported China with arms and funds to rebuild itself, Roosevelt felt it was warranted to quarantine the aggressors, to quarantine the Empire of Japan. In Hitler's quest to expand Germany's land, territory, and power, he began marching throughout Europe. In an act of appeasement called the Munich Pact, this allowed Hitler to invade the Sudetenland if he would stop there. The Prime Minister of Britain at the time, Neville Chamberlain, proclaimed that this act of appeasement had preserved peace in our time, allowing Nazis' leader and dictator, Adolf Hitler, to seize the Sudetenland. Continuing this sense of appeasement, France and Britain had adopted the policy of giving in to Hitler's demands to avoid direct conflict and war against France and Britain. Hitler soon breaks his promise and took over all of Czechoslovakia, which is in present-day Ukraine. Timeline of the Axis aggression in the early 1930s and throughout the decade is that between 1931 and 1932, Japan invaded and conquered Manchuria in mainland China. In 1935, Italy invaded and annexed Ethiopia in northern Africa. Between 1935 and 1936, Germany violated the Treaty of Versailles with conscription and remilitarizing the Rhineland. Between 1936 and 1939, Germany and Italy aided Francisco Franco in the Spanish Civil War. In 1937, Japan conquered Chinese coastal areas and essentially took control of China's eastern front. And in 1938, Hitler invaded and annexed Austria to protect German-speaking people from outside invaders. Continuing the timeline of Axis aggression throughout Europe and North Africa. In 1938, the Munich Pact, where France and Britain allow Hitler to take the Sudetenland if he would demand no more territory. Well, like mentioned earlier, 6 months later, he broke his promise and took all of Czechoslovakia, which was present-day Ukraine. In 1939, Benito Mussolini of Italy invaded and annexed Albania in Africa. In 1939, Germany signed the Non-Aggression Pact with Russia. Russia would not interfere in German affairs in Poland, and Germany wouldn't interfere in Russian affairs in the Baltic states. In September 1st of 1939, Germany formally invades Poland. France and Britain, coming to Poland's aid, declared war on Germany. Timeline of the Axis of evil and their aggression throughout Europe. The long-range causes of World War II. So first in the timeline, we see a rise in dictatorships throughout the region. Second, these dictators, these world leaders, have military authority and create a militarism state. Third, they evoke nationalism amongst the citizens, fervent nationalism, a belief in their own country's powers over everyone else. Fourth, they practice imperialism by seeking to overtake local governments, to annex sovereign nations. And five, we see the failure of appeasement from other nations, seeking to keep the peace at all costs, as opposed to dealing with this increase in dictatorships, militarism, nationalism, and imperialism. Early action of the war. We see tremendous occurrences of German success. Germany unleashed the Blitzkrieg warfare system, or lightning war. This was a quick and effective coordination of all parts of the military. This allowed Germany to roll through Poland and easily take Denmark and Norway to secure naval bases in Northern Europe and throughout the region. So how exactly did Germany's Blitzkrieg tactics work? These tactics were designed to avoid the stalemate and trench warfare of World War I. The objective was to break through enemy lines at the weakest points and then rush forward to spread fear and confusion behind the lines. Pockets of enemy resistance could then be isolated and destroyed. There were 6 stages to these lightning strikes. The first stage was German attackers identify a weak spot on the enemy's lines. Second, infantry troops create a smoke screen to hide the forces gathering for a breakthrough. Third, planes bomb military and civilian targets behind the lines. Paratroopers disrupt communications and slow the movement of enemy reinforcements. Fourth, tanks break through the weak spot, spreading panic among troops and civilians. 5. Motorized divisions move through the opening and circle back to surround the enemy forces from behind. And 6. Infantry troops arrive to take care of any remaining areas of resistance. With these strategies, German success was seen throughout Europe. Germany successfully invaded France through Belgium and the Netherlands. Nazi armies easily defeated the Allies, and France surrendered. Germany set up a puppet government in the south at Vichy and occupied the north. Germany continued their onslaught, bombing Great Britain for 3 months to soften the island's defenses for invasion. The British Air Force claimed victory in this Battle of Britain when Hitler chose to postpone his invasion of Britain.